My biggest regret is having spent a good part of my youth listening to radios like RFI, France 24.
Traoré wasn't just speaking, he was instructing. In just a few minutes, he laid out a step-by-step formula for breaking Africa free from the grip of imperialism. No vague talk, no rehearsed diplomacy, just a raw, unapologetic breakdown of what Africa must do, how it must do it, and what will happen if it doesn't. Let's get into it. Africa must fight imperialism like Russia did.
Marking the 80th anniversary of the victory over Nazism, we took part in the parade yesterday. Earlier, the day before, we also attended a number of cultural events. And I would like to say that we have learned a lot of lessons from all these celebrations, which should give us room for thought and needed motivation to get the African machine back on track. And today, a lot of nations are fighting for their survival, sovereignty, and peace. And the Sahel region is part of the area feeling heavy pressure and influence of imperialism. And with all we are experiencing, I do hope we can honor the memory of all those people, soldiers, who sacrificed their bodies and souls and advanced our struggle against imperialism and neo-colonialism. I therefore declare a moment of silence.
To the casual listener, this may sound like political theater, a rallying cry meant to provoke or win applause. But if you pay attention to the timing, the phrasing, and the context, what Traoré said was far more calculated. It wasn't about aligning with Russia or antagonizing the West for the sake of it. It was a statement of method, a clear call to African nations to study how a sanctioned, cornered, demonized country found ways to survive without surrender. Russia didn't just fight in the past, it has been doing it since then. When Russia was hit with a barrage of Western sanctions in 2022, every economist in the West predicted total collapse. The ruble would crash, the economy would fold, the people would turn against their government. But none of that happened. Instead, Russia imposed countermeasures, localized critical industries, built strategic partnerships outside of Europe, and hardened its currency by backing it with real resources. Whether you support Russia or not is irrelevant. The point Traoré was making is this: Russia didn't wait for mercy. It built alternatives. This is where African nations have historically failed. When hit by sanctions, coups, IMF conditionalities, or donor withdrawals, the default response has been concession, to accept terms, reduce ambitions, or wait for support that comes with more strings than solutions. What Traoré is advocating is a complete reversal of this instinct. He is telling Africa to anticipate pressure and prepare to operate without Western approval. To fight imperialism, the Russian way doesn't mean copying Russia's foreign policy or military model. It means understanding that independence requires self-sufficiency, even when the cost is isolation. It means recognizing that a nation must have leverage before it can negotiate, and that leverage doesn't come from handshakes at summits. It comes from the ability to survive without the empire's lifeline. Traoré's choice to highlight Russia is also a challenge to the conventional model Africa has followed since the 1960s. Look to Europe for funding, to the US for security, and to global institutions for validation. But that model has failed. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are proving that when you reject it, you don't collapse, you begin to detox. This moment in his speech wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. He is telling African leaders, study how Russia converted isolation into autonomy. Learn how they turned sanctions into fuel. Don't just complain about imperialism, learn how to break it. This is the starting point, not the end of the journey, just the first act. Because once you reject the empire, you have to build something in its place. And that's where the real work begins. But Africa cannot rise by theory alone. And this is where many so-called independent nations have quietly sabotaged themselves. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue.
I'll give you a few examples during my speech to help you understand what I mean. We are at Mendeleev University, Dmitry Mendeleev University of Chemical Technology of Russia. Everyone knows Mendeleev for his scientific achievements. Let me share a short story. While studying at school, there were people who didn't like certain things, who couldn't learn them successfully. and when they couldn't learn a particular concept, we would nickname them after the scientists who invented it. For example, we had students called Pavlov or Mendeleev. I personally enjoy science. I'm a scientist. One could wake me up at any time and I'd recite Mendeleev's periodic table. The same goes for the chemical equations we've spent so much time working on since secondary school. We're very good at doing so on paper. Similarly with thermodynamics. I tell you this to prove that practice matters, and we lack the laboratories to practice more. For example, we're at war. We pay for equipment, ammunition, weapons, and so on. Speaking of ammunition, explosives. Mali produces cotton, as does Burkina Faso and Niger. However, as you know, it's the cotton cellulose that's used to produce gunpowder and explosives. Why can't we do that? We don't develop practical chemistry. Similarly, you see all the types of missiles Russia builds. The latest is Oreshnik missile that has made the whole world laugh. However, the fuel and everything else is chemistry.
Africa holds elections, prints their flags, and issues statements at the UN, but they do not control the process of creation. They rely on imports for medicine, energy, even soap and pencils. Why? Because they lack one foundational thing: a system to turn knowledge into action. That's what laboratories do. A laboratory is not just a building with test tubes. It is a place where a nation learns to think through its problems, design its solutions, and fail on its terms until it succeeds. And this isn't limited to chemistry or engineering. There are no functioning political laboratories in Africa either. No room to experiment with alternative governance. No protected space to test Pan-African trade models. No military-industrial research zones. Instead, every idea gets filtered through external donors, consultants, and international frameworks before it ever touches African soil. Traoré's point was brutally honest. We need places to practice. That's because most of Africa's education is still colonial in structure. Schools teach young people how to follow, not how to invent. Graduates emerge fluent in theory, but disabled when it comes to execution. The elite have degrees, but no tools. And when a crisis hits, the continent doesn't mobilize its experts. It calls Paris, Geneva, or Washington. This is a crisis of design. To sever ties with imperial control, you need more than slogans. You need internal systems where solutions are built, tested, and refined. That's why Traoré doesn't just talk about kicking out French troops. He talks about building alternatives from scratch. Laboratories for agriculture, defense, education, medicine, infrastructure, and energy. And most importantly, these labs must be local, hands-on, and shielded from foreign interference. Because the ultimate battle isn't fought on a battlefield, it's fought in the workshop, in the lab, in the farm plot, and in the factory. If Africa doesn't produce its engineers, scientists, and solution makers through hands-on practice, it will always be trapped in a cycle of dependency. And Traoré knows, once you build your lab, you build your power. But if you don't, your enemy will do the building and send you the bill. And that's exactly what he warns about next.
Therefore, I encourage you to use this opportunity and learn in practice for our common benefit. If a country is weak, it is doomed to disappear in this world of predators. It must be strong. Nuclear powers are strong. They will never lose a war. We can tell you everything about the nuclear bomb, isotope fission, and energy release, but can we successfully put it into practice? That is why you should take this opportunity, as you are the key to the development of our country.
This wasn't said in a poetic or philosophical tone. It was a factual statement. And it hits hard because it's undeniably true. In global politics, weakness is not tolerated. It's exploited. The world doesn't pity fragile nations. It uses them. It strips them. It sells them protection and calls it aid. And if that doesn't work, it replaces their leaders, burns their systems down, and starts again under a new puppet. That's what Traoré was saying. No one negotiates with a beggar. Power isn't about moral correctness or diplomatic smiles. It's about capacity. And in Africa's case, the lack of strength means that every foreign power, from France to the US to the EU, sees it as a place to extract, control, and manipulate. Not respect. This is why Traoré refuses to play the game of false optimism. He doesn't say, Africa will be fine. He says plainly, if we stay weak, we will be broken. Because he understands what most elites pretend not to. that the West only respects what it fears. And right now, it fears none of Africa's institutions, armies, or industries, because they're either underdeveloped or foreign-controlled. You cannot negotiate with the IMF when your food system depends on foreign fertilizer. You cannot defy a military superpower when your weapons are bought from them. You cannot demand trade justice when your ports, currencies, and supply chains are dictated by former colonial powers. Weakness in any one area becomes a pressure point, and Africa has too many exposed arteries. That's why Traoré keeps rejecting foreign security deals, turning down donor aid, and emphasizing military training. Not because he's an isolationist, but because he knows every inch of dependency is a crack in the wall. You don't have to invade a country that relies on you. You just need to deny it access to what it needs. And that's what France and its allies have mastered, controlling Africa without visibly occupying it. So Traoré is forcing the issue. Africa must train. Africa must strengthen itself. Africa must become untouchable, not in theory but in practical capacity, from defense to production to energy. Because in this world, the only thing worse than being poor is being poor and soft. And right when Africa starts toughening up, exposing the roots of its weakness, the empire does something else. It panics, and it lies. When a system built on domination begins to lose control, it doesn't go silent. It screams. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now.
Take a look at their statements. Those of the French president, Emmanuel Macron, for example. He is always saying young Africans are influenced by Russia. And Western media, all they do is lie. And speaking of AES, Alliance of Sahel States, which is a model of emerging structure, they can't spend their day without mentioning Burkina or AES. They cannot but talk about it. And every time they seek to use this information to manipulate the youth, but it no longer works. I think people are quite aware of their goals. They manage to distort history by using this rhetoric, including the history of Africa. They could pass off lies as the truth, leading to some young Africans not knowing Africa's history. What has Africa done? Some don't even know that our grandparents fought, being used as cannon fodder, and in return, killed like animals. Do people know that when France experimented with its first atomic bomb, it was black soldiers who were placed in the lethal radius to see what effect it had? It's all in the archives. Everything they used against Africa is terrible. So there is all this that must be communicated for young Africans for them to learn it, because there are still many in the dark who continue to support the imperialists, believing what they say and do. Maybe because they're given something, I'm not sure. But Africa must learn its history. Wake up. This is what we also fight for.
Once Burkina Faso started rejecting foreign troops, turning down aid and securing its borders, the shift in Western media was immediate. Headlines labeled the country unstable, authoritarian, or military-ruled. News reports focused on fear, not facts, and Traoré knows why. Burkina Faso was supposed to fail. That was the narrative. A poor, landlocked country couldn't possibly survive without France's military presence or the World Bank's loans. And when it did, when it started building, defending, and inspiring others, it became dangerous. Not to its people, to the empire's illusion. Because if Burkina Faso succeeds without the West, then so can Mali, so can Niger, so can Congo, Chad, Togo, and Guinea. That is the nightmare scenario for neo-colonial systems, the one thing they cannot allow. An African country proving it doesn't need them. That's why they're lying. Not out of ignorance, but out of strategy. It's not just Burkina Faso under fire. It's the idea of African autonomy itself. The goal is to isolate Traoré, discredit his government, and infect African minds with doubt. If they can't stop him by force, they'll try to make him look crazy, dangerous, or unstable. This is information warfare, and most Africans still don't realize they're the targets. That's the deeper warning Traoré gave. He said, people are starting to wake up, but many still believe what they're told. They still consume Western narratives unfiltered. They still trust headlines from France 24, BBC, or RFI more than they trust their own eyes, ears, and communities. This is the colonial legacy no one talks about, the psychological chain. Even after the troops leave, the narrative stays. And that's the final trap. The empire's loudest weapon is no longer its army. It's its story. Burkina Faso is now a symbol, not just of resistance, but of narrative defiance. And that's why it's being smeared. Traoré's message is clear. Don't wait for their media to tell you what's happening. Live it. See it. Think for yourself, because the final stage of liberation isn't physical, it's mental. Are you still waiting for the West to save Africa? What happens when a poor nation proves it doesn't need its colonizers? Let us know in the comments section. Will you keep believing their headlines or start writing your own? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.